Review with John and Becks.
Hey guys, welcome to the first episode of our little critical review show here that we got going on. The idea behind it, of course, is pushing each other's through the bit of the comfort zone that Becks or I might actually personally have, with certain forms of media and entertainment. I'm John, of course, and my lovely co-host here, Becks.
Hi, Rebecca or Becks.
And today, if you haven't seen from the little blurb that I threw up, it's going to be about Pan's Labyrinth, which was came out on December 29th in 2006, and director Guillermo del Toro. I never saw the movie before. It wasn't really one of my cup of tea type things, and I'll get into that a little bit further. So that's pretty much the basic aspects of like the movie itself, as far as some of the hard numbers and stuff like that. But if you want to maybe tell them a little bit more about what the movie encompasses as far as its story and such like that, then maybe we can kind of work from there.
Okay, so from the gist of it, what I gather is that it focuses around a central character who is a child, and I don't recall if they ever say exactly what her age is. I want to say 10 or 11, maybe. It might be in there, and I've missed it, even though I've watched it numerous times. I've never really watched it with a critical view like I did this time, so that's kind of new territory for me.
Same here.
But it's an adult fairy tale, basically. And there's a very big question that arises in it, which we'll talk about a little bit later, about the aspect of reality in the movie itself. I believe we both made notes about that, so that's kind of an interesting aspect to look into. It is set in Spain in 1944, so this is shortly after the Spanish Civil War, I believe, as well as predating and leading right into World War II.
Yeah, they talk about.
I'm not the history buff here. That's him.
Francisco. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but Francisco Fernando. I'm sure I'm wrong. I'll put a real name up in the editing, probably with a big fat asterisk on it, because I know I'm probably not correct right now. But he was a sympathizer with Nazi Germany, if I'm not mistaken. Probably why they had the great uniforms on and stuff like that.
There are very strong fascist overtones throughout the movie. I did actually want to look up the character of the stepfather to see if that was an actual name used.
The captain?
There probably is somebody by that name. That doesn't mean it's actually in any way based on him, of course.
I'm terrible with names. I'm not going to lie about that, especially reality, fictitious, anything like that with names. I'm freaking terrible, so I'm just going to call him the captain.
Well, his last name was Vidal, Captain Vidal.
Okay.
I don't recall if they say his first name or not. They probably do, and again, it's one of those things that maybe it just wasn't important enough for me to remember.
It's like Bob.
No, it's definitely
Roberto.
It's definitely not Bob. Definitely not Bob. But I mean, they don't ever refer to him much by his first name. It's always just Captain.
Well, I think that kind of represents the character a little bit in itself too, because there's an air of respect, and I would even go on the record of saying fear. This guy's a fucking bastard in this movie.
It's definitely a strong motivator with his presence of power. He's very much a fear motivator as far as that goes. I mean, that's present almost from the get-go, but it becomes very obvious as the movie goes on. And it's not just an aura or impression of fear. I mean, he follows through with the brutality inherent in what he says. So that's significant.
We got a main bad guy villain that plays kind of like the wicked stepfather, if you will. I like the kind of the bit of role reversal. Usually it's the wicked stepmother in these fairy tales and stuff like that. So
right, which is a kind of a nice twist on it.
They kind of flip that around a little bit too. And I mean, like you said, it's pretty much about this girl that is escaping the hardships of war, escaping the hardships of a missing father, and set against a horrific time of World War II draft.
I mean, the reality was just it was a very difficult time to be alive anywhere in the world, I think, at that point. I mean, there was very much a lot of civil turmoil everywhere around the world with the world events going on. But to give you basic premise, I know we kind of segued away from that. I will do that on occasion. I tangent. It is what it is. It's based around Ophelia. Again, I don't know, roughly 10 or 11. It might say, I don't recall. And her mother are traveling to meet the captain where he has been stationed in his military assignment. And that's where the movie begins. You don't have, I don't remember they give a specific timeline for how long the captain and her mother have been married. Maybe a year and a half at most.
Yeah, I mean,
she's
pregnant with child and late in labor, so
she's late gestational period. One of the things that I kind of point out later, like their doctors was like, you know, she shouldn't have traveled this late in her pregnancy. But that will segue into a whole other topic of discussion, assuming we don't kill ourselves on time as I chatter. So, but yes, basically, Ophelia and her mother are traveling to meet him. He is already at this station assignment. It's an old flour mill, is the impression that I got. And it's got, you know, a house and a separate storeroom that might be attached. I'm not entirely sure. But again, it's set in a time period where you don't have common electricity. So you see a lot of use with lighting, which I'm sure they had to supplement for actual film production, but a lot of the use of lighting is candles, oil lamps, fireplace, or natural light through windows, which definitely in some places absolutely leads to the ambience of the scene itself.
Yeah.
Right? Because you have these dark corners and these spaces that you can play into, whether you utilize them as an appropriate space or not.
Yeah, the lighting is definitely one of the highlights of this movie that I think of, especially with the fact that they kind of led that ambience and doing filming and stuff like that, amateur style. I know that lighting is a huge aspect of any ambient feel for a film. You know, you get a lot of lighting aspects that kind of gives you the feel for the movie, and this one did a really good job as having that kind of that. Almost reminds me of the kind of like in the old like 50s and 60s movies when they would use like day filters and stuff like that.
Right, to make it look like nighttime. Yeah, where they would put like the shade filter over. Yeah. There's a lot, there's a large amount of, I'm sorry, I'm speech interrupters here. There's a lot of foreshadowing present in this film, which many people will catch from the get-go, but on like third or fourth viewing, you're like, oh yeah, like I see where that plays into it.
All the more reason I want you to kind of lead this, because first off, you know, I figured if we're going to be doing like this kind of back and forth thing with different types of reviews, ladies first. First off, you know, like you should get the picture first and everything like that.
Right.
And secondly, if I didn't mention it, it's subtitled, and I'm not a fan of subtitles. I mean, I'm even to the point where I was like, when I'm watching Netflix, I remember I said one time, she was just like, why do you always want the subtitles off? I like the subtitles. And I was like, well, if I wanted to like read the screenplay, I'd just read the frickin' screenplay, you know?
It's not the same, but yes.
But yeah, so that's why I figured, plus I'm sure I've seen it more than the one time that I have.
Yeah, several, yes.
Yeah, so.
But again, you know, I've never tried to look at it critically as opposed to just enjoyment. So it's some, you know, new territory for me. He'll get a lot more into a lot of the visual things. There's a few things that I'm going to touch on because that's going to be more the things he notices probably for me. But I mean, from the get-go, like the opening scene is just remarkable all in itself. I mean, you start off with this picture of this little girl where it's panned in on her face and body, where she's laying down and she's got blood coming out of her nose and like dripping down her hand, and it shows like the blood like regress back in, like it's a reverse photography effect, so to speak. And right away you're like, wait a minute, what is going on here that we've got this little girl like bleeding on the screen, right? And then it kind of like jumps. It doesn't really give you an accurate timeline of how far in the past it jumps, but it jumps to the past. And what it does is it leads back to that scene towards the end of the film to kind of wrap it back up.
I didn't even notice that. But you're totally right. I didn't even put that together, but yes. Yeah, okay. That's... It's like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I didn't
like,
think
that
about
totally did happen. Another big thing that I really enjoyed, I loved the music in this. It's got a very... Of course, it's got a very fantastical component, right? But it's very creepy and eerie at times. Even when it's supposed to be almost a lullaby, soothing type effect, it's still kind of got that little bit of edge to it where you're like, I'm not really sure that this is actually a soothing melody or a soothing tone at this point.
kind of very Brothers Grimm fairy tale, like some darkness type.
Yeah, it's a very dark film. There are some significantly brutal moments in it, as we'll discuss
best parts
later. Definitely not a child's fairy tale.
Yeah.
This is an adult movie, without question. This is an adult movie. So the premise again behind the story is Ophelia becomes represented as this lost princess of the underworld, essentially. And you don't really find out who her mother is, I think, until later. But her mother was supposed to be the moon, and her father is king of the underworld. Whether that's supposed to be the devil or something else, I'm not really sure. The imagery that they use leading into the scenes where they have the underworld present are very dark and somewhat grim. But there's a final scene in there which kind of belies all that, because it's actually very brightly lit and full of warm and soft golden tones, as opposed to a dark contrast.
Was kind of throughout the whole movie. Yeah, like it to me, like overall, I was thinking like this kid's playing with forces that she shouldn't be fucking with. Was kind of the tone I was getting because of how dark a lot of the creatures and the monsters and everything. If I could just touch on that for a second, is the visual effects in this movie are next to none.
They're fabulous.
It was actually done by David Marty and Matisse Rib of DDT Barcelona, which is also the same people, and they did it by themselves, which is amazing to me. It was a two-man team, essentially, that did all the visualization. But also, they happened to do other movies such as Devil's Backbone and also Hellboy, if you're familiar with that movie, from 2003. So, oddly enough, here we are again, Hellboy and this movie, World War II tie-in. Maybe it's just their thing.
Right.
Funny
thing about that, too, is Guillermo del Toro, produced or directed Hellboy 2.
Yeah.
Right.
No, he did the first one, I believe.
Was it the first one as well?
Yeah,
I know he did at least one of them. I will say, though, if you're at all an occult or a fantasy fan that has a grim or dark nature attached to it, check out some of his other work. He has some really excellent work. He has The Orphanage is particularly creepy. I was a big fan of that one. I've watched it several times as well. There's another one that I'm going to flake on the names. The Devil's Backbone, I think.
That's the one I just
maybe.
mentioned. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you did. It was pretty good too. But he definitely has a very, I don't want to say niche style of writing, because some of his stuff clearly doesn't fit that. But he fits dark fantasy
very occult,
very well.
Yeah.
I don't know how familiar y'all are with any of his other work, but he actually paired with, and I can't remember the name of the other author, he actually paired with another author, and they wrote a series of novels called The Strain, which was actually adapted into a TV series about 4 or 5 years ago. And it was pretty interesting, too. It's kind of a spin on vampires. And as far as like their physical body presentation and how they end up ingrained in our society. So that's a whole little interesting story arc too, if you're interested in that kind of thing at all. Right, so my things that I comment on are, of course, are going to be very relevant to me viewing it from when I initially viewed it to, of course, everything's going to be influenced by current society. That's how it goes. And watching it again as an adult, one of the big things that I notice is the very heavy-handedness of male dominance throughout this movie. It's very, very prevalent. And
The fucking captain.
you don't have a large amount of strong female characters. The strongest character, I would say, is not even actually Ophelia. The strongest is Magdalena.
The housekeeper.
The housekeeper.
Yeah.
Because her role in the movie is dramatic, not even so much in relation to Ophelia, but into the background story of the resistance against the current Spanish government regime. And she makes a comment at one point in the movie about how she's a coward, and it's like, no, you're probably the strongest one out there,
I mean,
because of what you're doing.
Even to the point of the makeup that they did on her and the wardrobe that she was in, she looked like she was very gritty and very hardened. That is for sure. It looks like she's definitely one of those people that work their hands to the bone type, and
just keeps going,
Yeah.
and just keeps going. I mean, you can tell like you can see it on her face. She's drawn, she's exhausted, and she's stressed, and she's scared of the unknown, but she's still doing everything that she can, and she still serves as a surrogate mother to Ophelia at times, and still has that soft nature.
yeah, because the real mom didn't have much of a backdrop in the movie besides kind of being sick during child labor. I mean, when that happens, they show up and shouldn't have been traveling and stuff like that, from what I recalled, and give her bed rest. And the doctor character kept on giving her some sort of medication, but he didn't seem like she was, from his opinion and what I was picking up, like it didn't seem too promising. He was always kind of on the back burner of like being concerned,
right?
I
mean, his presence always was, bed rest, bed rest. She needs to not be doing things. She needs to be on bed rest. Like, she's already unstable, and then you've made her condition that much more precarious by having her travel all this way. And then you've got the emotional stressors, which are more significant than people realize, of her trying to integrate into this society with her husband. And he doesn't assist that in any capacity. At one point, they're hosting a dinner party, and one of the other women asks a very logical, normal, female-type question without trying to put stereotypes on. She asks about how, they met when they got married, and so she tells the story, and her husband overrides her, and he's like, oh, please forgive my wife. She doesn't realize nobody wants to hear these silly things.
Well, I think
and it's like, well, yeah, like, obviously they do, because that's why they ask.
there's definitely the stereotyping of, the differences between the sexes and stuff like that, that's for sure. But I think more or less it's just the impact that this character, be him man or woman, is a fucking asshole. I mean, when it comes to, like, the first visual effect that really kind of blew my mind is when these characters find a hunter and a son. They bring these two woodsmen, to the captain, and pretty much bring him down from whatever chore or whatever thing that he was doing at the time. And he was, goddamn, I mean, really short, to the point where just like the first visual effect, I was just like, holy Christ, man. They ended up going through his possessions, and they found a bottle in the possessions, and turns this dude's nose pretty much into like Play-Doh. I mean, it really is like, I'm gonna have to find that clip and dig it up and chuck it on. But it's brutal.
He beats his face in.
It is brutal. I mean, like that, and you can see the impact of the bottle just flattening the dude's nose out. You're killing my dad.
And
like,
then,
wow.
and then. And then you find out later, like in the same scene, you find out later, because their story was like, hey, we were out hunting for rabbits.
Yeah.
Food's scarce, we're out hunting for rabbits. And he just can't believe anybody at face value. And he's like, no, you're out spreading propaganda, yada, yada, yada. And as he's digging through their bag, after he's killed both the father and the son, because then he kills the son, he beats his face in with this wine bottle. or water bottle, whatever's
Yeah,
the
it was the
bottle.
son, not the dad. You're
Right?
right.
And then he shoots the father because he's making a big stink about, like, he didn't do anything wrong. Why did you kill him? Blah, 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 blah. And so he ends up shooting him because he's just like, I'm tired of hearing this. You know, y'all are inconsequential to me at this point, which is present throughout the film, that people are inconsequential to him.
And reinforced by the line when he says, like, next time you come and get me, learn how to question some people and stop wasting my goddamn time.
Right, and so, and then of
Jeez.
course, as he's digging through their bag, he finds, you know, 2 young rabbits, and that's when he's like, maybe next time you'll learn how to search people correctly. You know, and it's just like, okay, or maybe you could have actually not had the presumption of guilt beforehand and maybe listened to what they were saying. And I know, like, that's a very overt display of his brutality, but my first pickup of his brutal nature was when they first even arrive at the mill, right? They're climbing out of the car, and Ophelia gets out of the car, and her mom's like, hey, say hello to the captain or whatever. And Ophelia's got a handful of books. She's holding them in her right arm, and she goes to extend her left hand out, basically to shake his hand and say hello. And he grabs her hand with his right hand, and he's like, it's the wrong hand, Ophelia. And he squeezes it enough to make her wince. So automatically right there, he's already like asserting this physical dominance power as a method of correction. You know, I mean, I picked up on that probably the first time I watched it. I was like, dude, this guy's an asshole. Like, plain and simple, this guy's an asshole. But to get into like the fantastical aspect of it, they start that off right away from the beginning too. You get this impression that Ophelia is a very big reader. She gets lost into her storybooks and her fairy tales, and her mom kind of condemns her for that. Like, oh, you read too much or whatever, which brings up an interesting point later that her mom's character is a little washy to me, and it makes me a little irritable. But she talks about, you know, these fairy tales aren't real, you need to be invested in the real world, and my stance on that is like, she's 10 or 11. Like, let her be a kid, right? Let her be a kid while she can be a kid, because in a few years, she's not going to be able to be a kid anymore. But it brings that fantasy element introduction right there with the stories that she gets engaged in. And then you have this insect, which looks like a walking stick, but then it acts like a grasshopper. It's
kind of dated.
It's not a very...
It's CG.
It's not a good representation of an insect, in my opinion, too. But that also kind of plays in later with the transformation of the insect itself. But they stop the car because Ophelia's mother gets nauseated. She gets sick and she has to stop to vomit. And Ophelia's kind of walking around and she finds this stone that's clearly like a piece of a statue. And it's like a partial eye socket. And so she walks around to find where it's from, and she finds this statue that it fits into. And Ophelia like fits it up in there, and you hear like this click, almost like it's a key that was meant for her to find to start this process of leading her back into her role of where she came from. Because the fantasy story is that this princess of the underworld ran up the stairs and was blinded by the sun and lost her memory and has been residing with humans since then, continuously being reborn and reincarnated until she can return to the underworld. So, like, that whole little segment with the stone acting like a key is almost like a trigger into, like, all right, here's the other part of the story that we're going to be looking at here versus the reality world and the fantasy world. And that's where that walking stick / grasshopper erupts. It comes out of the mouth of this statue, and then it's present throughout the rest of the movie. That one particular insect is prominent throughout the rest of the movie, sometimes as a guide for her, and sometimes just there, right? But, yeah, so anyway, so we get to the mill, and from there, you kind of get this whole storyline going on, and the servant woman, who's also like a resistance fighter, for lack of a better word, she's a spy. She's a spy in the resistance, or for the resistance. She immediately sets up this bond with Ophelia because they talk about this labyrinth that they found, and she immediately wants her. She's like, "Hey, be careful in labyrinths. Like, you might want to get lost in there," which is again a reference to, well, that's how she got lost in the first place, is because she went up through the labyrinth.
That was one of the weirdest points of contention that I thought I had about the movie itself. Was these guys are living in this mill or whatever, and up in the mountains is where the resistance fighters are, and the captain's idea is to draw them out instead of going after them, which is okay in hindsight, but then I'm like, why would you not like bulldoze or excavate this fucking labyrinth that's supposedly been here the whole time, is what they said. Don't know where it came from, don't know how long it's been here, but it's been here for ever since we got here type thing. And I was like, well, I'm no strategic expert, but if I was a general and I had a fucking labyrinth right next to my house and there's supposed resistance fighters and stuff like that,
I'd be clearing that out.
Yeah, I would be knocking that son of a bitch down. Like, I wouldn't
Right.
want people like hiding in it and using it for like cover in a gunfight or something like that. So that was kind of weird.
Which is funny though too, because they never really do use it either.
Yeah, supposedly for it being a labyrinth, nobody ever got lost.
Right.
There was never a dead end moment. There was.
Well, there is one moment. There's only one that I can recall, and that's towards the end of the movie when Ophelia is going back into the labyrinth with her brother, and she gets stuck in a spot, and the walls all just kind of open up for her magically, and she gets to go straight through to the center of the labyrinth. But other than that, yeah, I mean, you have the opening of the labyrinth, and then suddenly they're at the middle, which is where this gateway portal is. And you never really see any of the rest of it.
She never really, didn't run into David Bowie or anything like that.
No David Bowie there. None of that. But as far as the visual effect, I did really enjoy that seemed to be an actual fabricated set, which was very nice, versus a CGI set. There's not a whole lot of CGI in this movie.
Yeah.
What's there, you can tell it's older CGI. It does stand out a little bit. On an older TV, it would obviously be far less noticeable, but on a higher definition TV, it's going to stand out a lot more.
And they did a good mixing of CGI with practical, like the toad that they come across in the labyrinth. I want to say that was a puppet and CGI kind of spliced in
Maybe
together
so.
a little bit like that, because
Right.
there were certain aspects of that, but I might be skipping ahead a little bit further, because the first character that I kind of got my attention was the Fawn.
The Fawn.
The Fawn is awesome looking.
The actual costume work they do is very phenomenal, because
Yeah.
you've got the Fawn and then the other creature later, which we'll discuss. Really, the only CGI aspect of him was the eyes.
Oh yeah, that creature was
Creepy as all get out, right?
But yeah, I mean, I don't want to try to skip over and gloss too much, but there are certain things about it, the Fawn itself. I'm just going to tell you about the visual aspects that I really enjoyed, and maybe she can fill you in a little bit more about the story aspect of what the Fawn kind of represents and everything like that. But the Fawn to me was cool in the bad guy sense, that certain bad guys are cool looking because they're dark and sinister. Like Darth Vader is cool because he wears a black cape and stuff like that. The Fawn himself is very dark. He has these cool Celtic rune type swirl patterns on him, and his eyes are very cold blue, and his skin color is very awesome looking. He has this feeling of pre-Christian hell to me, like when hell used to be an area of cold and gloom before it turned over to this hot hell, hell of apocalypse. Very far away from the light, which makes sense for if he's kind of a labyrinth, because the labyrinth itself it's an above ground garden, if you will, almost, that it kind of reminds me of, but then it does come to this area that's got a circular stairwell that runs down deeper, and that's where she first encounters him, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, she runs down the stairwell, and there's a statue there in the middle, which he references later, but apparently the stairwell itself only leads to the gateway to the underworld, and she never actually accesses the underworld until the very end of the movie, because there are tasks that have to be completed. Upon her first encounter with the Fawn, which, I mean, at her age, should have been terrifying, because let's be realistic.
I would have shit my
He
pants.
would have been terrifying if you look at his costume, which, again, phenomenal. One thing I do have to point out, though, Pan is traditionally a Fawn character, and it's been explicitly stated that this Fawn is not meant to be Pan, even though the movie is called Pan's Labyrinth.
Yeah, which is kind of weird because Pan is like a goat, and this guy, I don't...
Pan's more of a satyr
Yeah.
than a Fawn.
Yeah, I would say that
Right.
too. Yeah, he's definitely more magic, fairy-esque, like I said, Brothers Grimm type, versus, say, the classical Greek example or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
But his first encounter with Ophelia is where he actually tells her, well, yes, Ophelia is like your human name. Your actual name is Princess Moana, and that's your true name, which you've forgotten over the years. And in order to test you to see about returning to the underworld, you have to complete these 3 tasks. But he doesn't tell her what they are, just you're going to get 3 tasks, and I'm going to give them to you basically one at a time. Kind of a traditional, pathway there in storytelling. Like, you're going to have challenges that you have to overcome in order to get to your end goal.
It's very good at kind of reminiscent of a lot of heroes' journeys. It's not so much about the destination, it's about the journey along the way. And also kind of have, my interpretation of it, a set of challenges that the main protagonist has to overcome, is essentially kind of how I look at it. It definitely felt like that a lot, but after watching the end of the movie and then you kind of reinforcing it with the pointing out about the blood significance at the beginning and at the end, I ultimately came to my own conclusion about it, but it leaves that open-endedness at the end of the movie, which is kind of cool in my opinion. That a lot of good films do that. They kind of leave it up to the viewer to make the decision of what the fuck was actually happening for the viewing process, so that was pretty cool.
One of your first true signs that you see about potential magic being present in this world versus strictly in the underworld kind of segues back. I meant to mention this when we were first talking about the labyrinth itself. This insect, walking stick, grasshopper, whatever, ends up magically transforming for Ophelia into a fairy. Now, whether that's a mimicry or whether the other figure, being the insect itself, was the disguise, so to speak.
It's a lure.
You don't really know.
I think it's all a lure mechanic.
But it turns into a fairy, and then it actually leads her into the labyrinth that very first time, which explains why she doesn't get lost that first time.
But also, like I said, it's a very luring mechanic. Like, when it was the bug, it's like, follow me. Then, she's sitting there looking at this book, and, this is what pixies look like. And it's just like, okay, so you like pixies. Cool. Follow me.
Right.
Whatever I can do to get you to follow me.
And he's like, yeah, but come this way, right? But, so aside from the fantasy aspect, again, you get back to the whole male dominance aspect, right? Her mother tells her at some point, hey, I've got this surprise for you. And of course, Ophelia is like, oh, great, is that another book? And she's like, no, it's something better. And it turns out to be this dress that she had made for her, which brings in a whole other storyline, too. But it's significant because, for one, homemade clothing traditionally wouldn't have been something to be like, oh, look, it's so beautiful. Like, store-bought clothing would have been more impressive at that point. But Ophelia's father, biological father, was a tailor, and her mother worked with him and learned the trade with him. So having her make a dress is significant in the fact that this is going to be similar to a store quality or a personally tailored dress for her. The problem that I have with it personally is that, here's this present, and basically it's all designed about making you look pretty so we can present you to these people at this dinner party.
Yeah, it wasn't so much a gift per se.
It wasn't a gift for Ophelia, it was a status symbol for the parents.
The shoes, though.
And the shoes, yes.
Reminded me of fucking Lucy from Peanuts.
Yeah.
Those shoes!
Yeah. But it It brings back, and especially when you see where this scene ends up going, it brings back this whole point of, at one point she's chastising her for reading too much, and she's like, we have all this beautiful nature to go play in, but then she gets in trouble for having dirty shoes.
Well,
and a dirty dress.
Well, not and like that. I swear to God, I had flashbacks of that because a personal moment in my life. I remember being a kid and Mom wanted to take me out for a fucking play date. Hey Maz, and not a play date, but a meet date essentially to go meet a significant person that was important to her at the moment in time. And I ended up getting dressed up, and I had about half an hour to an hour or something like that to kill before going out to eat. And I decided it was a good idea to go play in a fucking ditch. My mom wanted to kick my ass, and that's what I wrote down on here was, I wrote that down around here. I was just like, that kid's gonna get her ass kicked.
Damn straight I would have kicked her ass, and I should have kicked your ass, too.
After playing in the mud before dinner, because all I had was flashbacks of me being a kid, and I was like, my mom didn't kick my ass, but it was about a severe. I thought that kid was. I mean, comparatively, how
she really didn't get punished badly at all.
Yeah, well, because the captain already set this precedent of like just being brutal by smashing that dude's son's face in with a bottle, then shooting him and everything like that. I was like, oh man, there's gonna be hell to pay. You know, like he's a dignitary introducing his stepdaughter to other dignitaries and stuff like that. I thought like there's gonna be some form of more corporal punishment or something like that. Yeah.
But it also brings up the lifelong, since the beginning of humanity, I'm sure, the lifelong of how when you have one parent that's overly aggressive, you will always have the parent that's like, no, I'll take care of this. Like, just walk away. And the few times that Ophelia is punished, the mother is the one that punishes her because she knows he's going to be too over the top.
And also, I think it's like very sidesteppy as well, if you can use that as an adjective. You know, like the kid goes to mom first and foremost. Out of when it makes sense. Like that's your real mom versus some jabron that you just met recently.
That you might have known for a year.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And haven't even been living with the whole year because who knows how long he's been at this station assignment. Yeah. That they're coming to meet him at. But, so we were talking about, we made this reference to this toad. This is the first task given to her, is that she's given these 3 stones by the Fawn.
Spoiler.
Yeah. I don't really think there's any, like, non-spoilers in here that's gonna happen,
It came out 14 years ago, if you haven't seen it,
like, kudos, here's some things to look for, right? She has to give these 3 stones to this toad because it has set up its residence at the bottom of this tree and it's killing the tree. And apparently there's a key that she has to retrieve from the toad. So this is how it segues into her. She's had a bath, she's dressed, ready for dinner, and she's like, yeah, I got time to go take care of this. No, she really doesn't. But then also a storm comes and she actually shows the presence of thought. She takes her dress off and hangs it on a tree outside to try to avoid getting it, muddy and dirty, which doesn't work because it gets blown off by the wind and gets covered in mud and stuff anyway. And then, of course, she's crawling through mud to get into this tree as it is.
Some CG bugs.
She does have to show a bit of cleverness to try to get this toad to eat the stones. She actually she picks up a large pill bug, basically what it's supposed to be is a large pill bug. And of course what happens when you touch a pill bug, right? They roll up into a little ball, right? And yeah, the other name is roly-poly. And so she picks one up and like shows it to him, and then she's like, hey, look what I got. And then she puts it in her hand with the all 3 of the stones at the same time. And you see this, CGI tongue from this toad, like, wrap around her whole hand. And, you can tell it's got significant strength because it damn near pulls her into his mouth itself. And it's like a little tug-of-war thing, like, let go of my hand and just take what's in my hand versus taking me with it.
And it leads to one of the most visual, satisfying parts of the film for me is when the toad eats the stones, it opens up like its mouth and it goes like Pac-Man style, like 180, and like all of this yellow bile and just gross shit. I mean, it's awesome. It's gross shit just comes oozing out
it's
of
like
it.
It's all stomach. It's like there's like a skin and then all stomach.
It's like bile or something because it's like got this yellowish tinge to it. It's gross. It's great.
And I always wondered if that was supposed to be some weird symbolism there versus like the toad is strictly the entity of, self gluttony, right? Because that was part of the reason that they were going to get this toad, was because by its nature of dominating the space, it was causing the tree to die. So who knows if that was supposed to be a symbolic effect there or not. It was a very interesting visual, though, that's for sure.
So we move on to the next challenge, which leads us to the other kick-ass monster. If I'm not mistaken, the second
probably
challenge.
the best one in the movie.
No, the I don't know what to call him, man. He just looks like a skin bag man or something like that. He's a hairless white kind of. I mean, I'll definitely chop in an image or something like that somewhere. Maybe
weird red and black fingertips and.
It's,
loose, saggy skin.
I mean, a picture does 1,000 words, so I'll just throw it up, probably right about here. All right, and then we go.
Definitely the stuff of nightmares, right? Especially the eyes.
I like the premise of it. It's not practical, but for a practical effect, it looks fucking cool. I mean, you use your hands to grab stuff, so how the hell are you supposed to see something and grab it? I don't know. It's kind of like goofy. He does like this beep thing and everything like that to kind of see around. But
right, because he has to embed his eyeballs in his palms. Like he doesn't have eyes.
That's when one of the aspects of the movie kind of popped up and kind of made me think of very biblical Adam and Eve type maybe spin-off per se, because there's a banquet. She has to go down and put this key into one of these 3 little doors, and oddly enough, the Fawn tells her, like, yeah, the pixies or whatever are going to tell you which door to pick, but she's like, no, it's not that one, it's this one. So I was like,
which is interesting.
What the fuck were you guys even here for? I mean, it wasn't even like a labyrinth. It was a hallway that went down to a banquet room, and he was like, don't eat the food. Whatever you do, don't eat the food.
Right.
Which kind of leads me to, like, the fucking tree of knowledge type fable from the Bible. Like, don't eat the fucking apple. Like, why? Don't.
Just don't.
Don't do it. Okay, well, little girl being little girl, eats a couple of grapes, and that's what wakes up the fucking, the hand-eye dude.
And I think the reason that it's supposed to show that her lack of control there is because if I was following the timeline correctly, this is the same night of the dinner party. This is later on, like the middle of the night of that dinner party. And part of her punishment was that she got sent to bed without supper. So she's hungry.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And she's presented with this feast, right? And she eats like 2 grapes, but it turns into this disastrous event.
Some of the most delicious grapes I think I've ever seen.
Oh yeah, they were great. They were
that
massive.
huge, man.
They had like the shimmer of like water on them.
Damn, dude, you need 2 mouths to eat that fucking grape. Big fucker. Looked like a plum. Like, goddamn. But getting there was also kind of a cool little footnote that she had, the Fawn gave her some magical chalk that she would use to draw an outline of the door, and that's how she accessed it.
That became her portal.
I kind of vaguely remember that in some other movie, but it's not striking me at the moment. But I could have sworn I've seen something like that before. Kind of reminds me maybe of the Rick and Morty episode with the little girl that has the magical. It's actually the mom character from the show, and when she was younger,
she had a portal gun or something.
When she was younger, Rick made a world for her. Fruity Land, and like it had magical chalk to go to that too. So maybe that's where I'm remembering it. But yeah, it was just like I've seen that before. Maybe it's like a trope per se, but the magical chalk. I don't know. It's cool. It's very youth oriented. You know, everybody's playing with chalk at one time in their life.
Right, for sure. So there's this book that the Fawn had given her, and this is another one of your presentations of power and magic in crossover into the reality world, because the book itself appears to be omniscient at times. She's reading this book when the Fawn comes to her again to give her the second task, when she's in the bathtub, I believe. So when she's coming back after she's in the bathtub and she's reading the book, and she's like, okay, show me what happens next, or show me what I'm supposed to do next, because she was supposed to, I guess, get her tasks from the book. And what happens is on the pages that she has open is you get this blood diagram, which most women would recognize right away, but I don't know how many men would. But this blood diagram, which initially looks like it could be like a ram's head or something, so you're thinking maybe it's something to do with the fawn, but no, what it's actually representing is ovaries and fallopian tubes and a uterus, and then the whole page just like turns into this massive red.
I mean, it was the Necronomicon to me, but yeah.
So that's when like her mother starts displaying this real dramatic illness and sickness at this point, and so the fawn like comes to her and he's like, you haven't completed the other task, and she's like, my mother's really sick, and he gives her this mandrake root.
Oh yeah, the tuber.
To come to hide under her mother's bed, and basically the mandrake root, he's like, put it in a bowl of fresh milk, put it under the bed, and feed it 2 drops of blood per day, which you're thinking it's supposed to be symbolic.
Again, leading to me thinking like, this is all satanic. There's some shit.
It's very dark.
It's very witchcrafty.
It's very, very witchcrafty. And so you're thinking, like, she's feeding this mandrake root, and it's supposed to be, like, synonymous growth with the fetus or whatever, right? But even though she's feeding this mandrake root, what you come to find out later is all the nutrition, for lack of a better term, that's going to this mandrake root is actually supporting the fetus itself in some weird shifting of power and growth, because the mandrake root does not thrive. Like, it's looking sickly. She goes back to check on it at a later time, and she's like, wow, you're not looking very good. What's going on? And it turns out that it is definitely tied to the fetus, because it ends up getting destroyed, and then that's what sends the mother into premature labor.
Yeah, the captain finds it underneath the bed, and has a little spaz moment on the kid and everything like that. And good creepy moment is when he takes the root itself and casts it into the fireplace, into the room, and it starts to squeal and shit like that. You know, so that was pretty cool. Ah, God, what a world! But yeah, that was pretty intense.
It's yeah. I mean, and in a lot of your literature, we'll talk about the mandrake root as a plant that wanted to be alive, and this very much gives it it anthropomorphizes this root very much, and does give it very human and lifelike qualities.
So if I can skip ahead a little bit, meanwhile on the outside world, there is catastrophe where the house gets raided, but they find out that the pantry itself, which supposedly only had one key, that the captain was supposedly a care holder over, actually there was multiple copies that the housekeeper gave away to her brother, who happens to be one of the collaborators that are out in the mountain. And long story short, because we are kind of going on a little bit here, comes in and he gets captured. And as far as visual effects go, oh my God, I'm definitely going to have to do something about that, just for entertainment purposes. There's a brutal scene when, after all is said and done, the sister goes against the captain and starts stabbing the shit out of him with this little paring knife that she keeps on her. And oh my God, there's this part where she puts the knife into his mouth, and I'll just let the editing pick that up, because holy shit, I could not describe it with justice perfectly. I mean, all I could think of when I first saw it was, holy shit, I'm having Batman flashbacks.
Look at these scars.
Yo no soy un viejo y un hombre herido, hijo de puta. Hijo de puta. No se te ocurra tocar a la niña. No serás el primer cerdo que devuelve.
One other thing that I think that was kind of funny that I kind of picked up was when, towards the end, when the child has got her brother and taking it towards the labyrinth, maybe the labyrinth had it before and I just didn't notice it, but the labyrinth's archway had a face above it, and it looked like the oh shit emoji that, you know, like, oh, so it's just gonna go down, you know. So I thought that was kind of an interesting little set piece, and I don't want to like say too much because you know, we should leave something for
for you to want to watch it.
Yeah, something for the viewers that maybe want to watch it. But when it comes down to the death of Ophelia, like, that's a big spoiler. She dies, but it's a very big retrospect, especially when she had that point about the blood at the beginning. When I saw that part, it kind of made me think of the open-endedness of it. Like, was she really crazy? Like, or was this really happening to her?
And there are things that definitely lend credibility to that. One of the visual effects they had nicely in here, she drugs the captain at one point to try to get away. And they have the room kind of like shimmer and wiggle like it's his point of view or steering wheel. I thought that was a really nice visual effect. But later on, he finds her in the labyrinth with the baby, and he's like, give him to me, you know, he's mine, he belongs to me. And she's like, no. And she's talking to the Fawn at the same time. But when it shows the point of view of the captain, he can't see the Fawn.
Yeah.
The Fawn is not there in his view. So the question is the Fawn really there?
Or is it magical powers or something
Right,
like
does he
that,
not see it because it doesn't exist at all, or does he not see it because the Fawn chooses for him to not see it?
And also, when you said thing about the blood and everything like that, maybe the whole movie itself was a period piece in her own mind, like when somebody's dying and they're having this illicit story flash before their eyes for the last few breaths, was also a kind of a possible explanation for the whole movie in itself, you know, just to kind of give herself a little bit more meaning as a person, as a character and everything like that, because if not, you know, it's kind of a stunted life and very insequential, you know, it's kind of a small, you know, you're just a kid, you don't really have much, you didn't really have your chance to kind of write your story out per se, so maybe that could be a lot of reasoning behind it as well, you know, like, so.
And we've touched a lot on the darkness of this story, right?
Yeah.
I mean, she's literally called the Princess of the Underworld, Princess Moana, the Princess of the Underworld. And one thing that I meant to mention earlier, when the Fawn comes back to give her this second task, he talks about, we can't wait for you to return to be with us, and then you can come with us and we can stroll through the beautiful, you know, the 7 circular gardens. And what I always think about when I hear that, I was like, 7 circular gardens, or is it actually the 7 circles of hell?
Heaven.
There's 7 circles of hell.
It's the 9 hells and 7 heavens, I thought.
It depends on which mythology you're looking at. Right, I mean,
I
could be wrong, but
I thought of heaven because that's what happened was like all of this light and everything like that. Like, her life was the downside. Like, life is hell. Was kind of like what I was getting, and the death was the ultimate reward at the end because she gets to be with her father again. She gets to be with her mother again, and also gets to be with the Fawn, who turns into Happy Joe fucking Dancy Pants at the fucking end, like,
right, yeah. I mean, his demeanor kind of changes. Another thing. So we're going to point out where he's going to bring in that visual regarded to that one scene with Magdalena. I keep wanting to say her name something else, but Magdalena.
The housekeeper.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I never wrote it down apparently. Yeah. But there's another prominent theme that we noticed throughout the movie, which I'm sure has no intention being in there whatsoever, but we both like commented on it, so of course we're going to point that out. Total other realm of fantasy horror, right? But apparently there's a big zombie problem going on around in Spain in 1944 because every time they go find a group of resistance fighters, they go through and they shoot everybody again on the ground.
It's the second rule of
So all I
Zombieland.
could think is like, yeah, it's the second rule of Zombieland. Make sure you double tap. So I was like, there must be a huge zombie problem there going on that we don't know about.
I don't know if I'd be able to dig through the whole movie and do it because Jesus Christ,
There's
it's
quite a-
like
it
fucking
happens a
half
lot.
a dozen times, dude.
And
They
you're just
shoot.
kind of like,
Why do they? It's like I understand,
Okay.
like maybe for the sake of like, you know, don't be cruel, don't let somebody like bleed out, whatever. Just put them out of their misery or something like that. But holy shit, claw, 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 claw. I mean, like fucking everybody gets shot twice in the head. I was just like, I forgot about that, but I'm glad you mentioned that because that was
yeah,
very,
apparently zombies.
very observant. Like we're making sure they don't come back.
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
my-
I'm like they're already dead. I'm like, but maybe they're not.
that was
so-
interesting.
Anyway, this I will say though, this is absolutely one of my favorite movies of all time. Like, I don't even have to sit and watch it and read the subtitles. I can just listen to them speak in Spanish and know enough of what's going on because I've seen it enough. And just the music alone. This is definitely one of the soundtracks that I would consider buying if I were still ever buying CDs and stuff anymore. But
Well,
it just hasn't ever happened.
I proposed a couple ideas, and I figured the one idea that I had that's kind of sticking out, and I think it might be a good way to kind of go as far as a rating system is fingers up or fingers down, right? So, one big finger up for the visual aspects for me. Like,
Definitely, that's, yeah,
I mean,
without
I
doubt.
cannot stress enough how much the visual aspects were a part of this movie that made it tolerable for me because on the fingers down, it's fucking Spanish. And nothing against Spaniards or Spanish-speaking people or anything like that, but it peeves me to be drawn away from the finger up with the finger down, if you catch my drift, you know? So I'm in the middle of the road a little bit on this movie. I'm glad I watched it. I'm glad we got something to share, and I'm glad you introduced me to it. I would say, based off of the recommendation, if you don't mind subtitled movies, by
Check it
all
out.
means, watch it because it's really cool. Will I jump in and watch it again? Perhaps one day. I'm not in a hurry to go watch it again per se. It's not Avengers or something like that to me. You know, I can't just like jump in and watch it all over again. But it was good. I mean, more or less. I mean, the story was pretty well rounded. They did some good, interesting aspects when it comes to the development of the characters. They definitely beat you over the head with the Captain character. He's a character you love to hate.
And he's one of those actors that, I mean, you have to commend him. Like,
Yeah.
he played his role well because you don't like him.
But otherwise, I hope you guys enjoyed our first little outing. Doing a critical review. Stick around for the next one. I get to choose, so I get to pick something really stupid and make her watch it more than likely. Probably be a movie. And I just want to say thanks you guys for always supporting us here on the Smoking GM page. Always give us a thumbs up if you can, and even if you can do one better and throw us out a share every once in a while, you know, maybe find some other people that are into movies and games or nerd tropes and stuff like that. It's always welcomed by us because we just like to share. Personally, that's why I do this. It's all about entertaining others, and these days we could all use a little bit more happiness and entertainment. It's definitely one of those things that's out there.
There's
so.
plenty of us that haven't, gone back out to work a lot yet because we're open, but we're not open.
Yeah. So, with that, always have fun with somebody that means something to you. You know, that's what this is all about with me and her. And until the next time, guys, peace, love, brotherhood, all that stuff.